Welcome to Learn with Lowell. I'm your host, Lowell, serial entrepreneur, startup advisor, and your host for the show. Every week we talk and discover experts, scientists, leaders from around the world. Please subscribe. It tells the Google gods this is content worth watching. Today we're joined with Dyan deNapoli, the penguin expert, award-winning author of The Penguin Rescue. The Great Penguin Rescue, sorry. And it's also on her back right shoulder for the people watching, you can see it. I recommend this book very highly if anyone wants to read it. She's a Tedx speaker as well, frequent guest expert on radio, podcast, television from around the globe, as well as frequent appearances on the BBC and CNN. Diane, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be back again.
Yes, this is the second time she's been on here. And for people listening in, if you spot a cat and you tag it in the timestamp, if you tag it below, I will like pin your comment to the top. There's a cat. We got great production value today. All right, so I've been wondering this question for some time, and hopefully you can answer it. But it's okay if you cannot, because this is kind of weird. I read a report that every now and again penguins will just wander off into Antarctica, never be seen again. Like just one will get up and be like, "I'm going to walk into the center." They don't know where they go, but you're the penguin expert. Do you know where they go, or do you have theories on where they go? And have you heard of this?
Well, I'm assuming you saw the Werner Herzog film, something. I'm trying to remember the title, something about the end of the world, or, do you know Werner Herzog? He's this very sort of eccentric filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. And he does have a film that I saw about Antarctica. It's about the scientists at McMurdo Station and how sort of quirky and interesting all these characters are. So it's really a character study. But at the end of the film, he has this clip of this one Adelie penguin doing just that, just sort of wandering off into the interior of Antarctica, probably never to be seen again. So, I don't know. This is not something I've really heard about from other scientists that I know, but it probably does happen from time to time. Who knows? I don't know, maybe an old penguin, maybe an ailing penguin, a confused penguin, maybe a young one, that didn't follow the crowd. So who knows?
But you have not personally witnessed a penguin just get up and walk into the interior.
I have not. No.
Okay. I was gonna ask, like, to what probability would you guess that there's like Cthulhian-esque monster in the middle of the Antarctic that the penguins are the only ones who know exists, and they like sacrificing themselves for the benefit of the globe? Because I feel like it's got to be greater than zero. You've been there, but when I think of that area, people always describe it as alien. It's the only continent that people weren't there before we started moving around again. So I feel like it's something to stop humans. There's got to be something weird there. But so what would you be your percentage guess on like there's something they're actually going towards something?
I don't think there is, but and I know there are sort of these out there theories about all this stuff that's really happening underground in Antarctica, which conspiracy theories. There's a lot of interesting conspiracy theories out there. But when you just said that Antarctica is alien, I always describe it when people say, "What is Antarctica like?" Because I've been 4 times now. And the first thing I always say, it's the most otherworldly place I've ever been. It feels like you've been dropped onto another planet because it's so unlike any place else that I've traveled to a lot of places in the world, and Antarctica is incredibly unique, incredibly different, and it does feel alien. It's just so vast and pristine and silent, and it's hard to even describe it in the words that we have.
From your first visit to your 4th visit, are there things that still strike you throughout when you're visiting there?
I mean,
like some things get old, right? But like there's some things that
nothing gets old.
Like, yeah, okay.
No. I mean, every minute of every day is different there. Like everything changes so quickly. The weather changes in a heartbeat. The conditions change in a heartbeat. Though there's so much wildlife and there's so many that everybody's doing something different. Each animal is doing something different. So there's so many behaviors, and every moment is unique. And so and myself and anybody that I know who has been there multiple times, people that work there and have been going for years and years and years, no one ever tires of it. In fact, it really gets into your blood and into your bones, and you feel like you can't get enough and you need to go back there. So no, it never gets tiring. It never gets old. It never gets dull in any way whatsoever.
Are there elements of it that you still want to explore, or do you primarily go for the penguins? Or is there like is there something to the physical location or to the penguins that draw you in?
I mean, for me, clearly, because I'm a penguin expert and that's what I have been, studying and writing about and teaching about for 25 years, that's my primary interest, but that's not my only interest. There's just something about the place itself. A lot of people are really drawn to the ice and the icebergs, and I find them very beautiful, but it's not what draws me. For me, it's more the overall scenery, the overall place, the overall vastness of it. And just, it's so remote, you really feel, like I said, you feel like you've been dropped on another planet. You just feel so far removed from life as you know it. And coming back, when you're there for a few weeks, when you re-enter, when you kind of sail back to Ushuaia on the ship, and all of a sudden you start seeing colors that you haven't seen, you realize, I haven't seen green for 3 weeks now, or I haven't seen that color for 3 weeks now. And you don't realize while you're there, all you're really seeing are blues and grays and whites. And that's kind of it. So, and I forgot the actual question you asked where I started. I went off on a tangent.
No, you were going where I wanted to hear about the idea that you're there for the penguins, but what else is there that draws you? The continent itself is very exciting to you as well. The different I hear that often that there's different hues of blue. I mean of ice and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting. I'm a fan of green, so if I were to go there, I think there'd probably be like someone have to stop me. I would try to like make a little greenhouse or something, which I'm sure there's like some type of treaty that says I'm not allowed to do that.
Yeah, you're not.
Because I just like. I like, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I just, I like seeing green where I go, even if it was just like a little plant, it'd make me happy.
I mean, there are lichens there, but they're a little more brown than green generally. Yeah, there's really not green down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Antarctica the one that it gets dark for like 6 months of the year, or is that the
Well, both poles will do that.
Yeah.
And so in Antarctica, when sort of tourists go there, and when I've gone there, because I'm usually going on these ships that are bringing tourists, I'm going as a guest expert, as a lecturer and a guest penguin expert. So I'm going on these ships. So when you're going as a tourist, you're going during the Antarctic summer, which is our winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. And when you're there during the Antarctic summer, it never gets dark. So the sun never sets. So the interesting thing for me about that is that I never get tired. Like your circadian rhythms, aren't, you're not getting the signal to go to sleep. And so you can be up at 1 o'clock in the morning taking photos because there's enough sunlight to do that. And so I usually am. And so, yeah, it's light 6 months and then it gets dark for 6 months. So during the Antarctic winter, the sun doesn't come up at all. And that, interestingly, is when the emperor penguin does its breeding, where the other penguins breed during the Antarctic summer, mostly on the Antarctic Peninsula. And that's, when you're going as a tourist, that's where you're going on these boats, is along the Antarctic Peninsula. So you're right there in the midst of these colonies with all these penguins are mating and laying eggs and raising chicks. And, all this life is going on. And during the Antarctic winter, that people, you'd only be going there if you're a researcher.
It was on my list to ask you why, or what would be your guess or hypothesis is around why the emperor penguin would lay its eggs at like the worst time of the year. Like if I was an egg laying anything, and I was like, and I had my choices during where I could see what I'm doing versus like in the dark, I'd probably not choose the dark. But because so is there any like science behind why they do that?
I mean, it seems like a Darwin Award recipient, right? In the penguin world, like what kind of evolutionary strategy is that to breed in the middle of the Antarctic winter where the sun never rises, where it's, can be 100 degrees below zero, winds can be blowing 100 miles an hour, and you're just sitting there on your egg for 2 months, not eating, while the female goes off to feed and you're the male all sitting, huddling together for warmth. I mean, it's crazy. It's a miracle that these birds have managed to survive and thrive there. I mean, they were actually just declared endangered about a few months ago. I think it was January that the emperor penguin was declared endangered because they are seeing some colony collapses in some areas. But yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from an evolutionary standpoint.
I wonder if it's like they're really self-conscious and they don't want to look at each other, when they're like in the mating dance, and like they have the term, emperor penguins, and that's just to kind of like make themselves seem big. It's like when you have a really big friend and you call him tiny, or a really small friend, you call him like, giant or something. I don't know what the alternative equivalent of this is, but maybe like the first explorers of the emperor penguin just realized they were like really shy. They're like, they didn't like seeing each other when they're mating or something. I don't know. That'd be like the silliest thing though. Or like predators couldn't find them, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, the one thing from an evolutionary standpoint that they did do right is that they evolved to be the largest penguin with the largest body mass and the largest amount of fat and the most feathers per square inch on their body. So, they had to develop some sort of adaptation, right, to survive in these extreme conditions. So, and that's where I think they get the name emperor penguin, because they are the largest and because of the beautiful markings that they have, these yellow and orange feathers around their chin and on the sides of their faces. They're really beautifully colored, where only they and the king penguin have those types of markings. The others are a little more plain looking.
Of the penguins that exist either in the Antarctic, in Antarctica, or throughout the world, is there a species or a type that you're really interested in learning more about, or that you want to be researching right now?
It's interesting the way you ask that, because usually people say, "What's your favorite penguin?" But nobody has asked me that. I think and they sort of are the same for me right now. So when I worked at the New England Aquarium, one of the species that we had there were little blue penguins, which are the smallest penguin. They're also called fairy penguins, and they're from Australia and New Zealand, and they're tiny. They're only like 2 to 3 pounds, and they're adorable. And they actually have blue feathers on their back, which is why they're called little blue. I actually have, so that's basically like a life-size little blue penguin.
Oh, it's adorable.
Yeah.
For people listening in, we're seeing a little plushy version of a blue penguin.
Right. And it's about 8 inches high, they're just a tiny little thing, and they're adorable. And so I had worked with them for years, and I really, that was a species I was very interested in. And then on my last trip to Antarctica in 2019, on that itinerary, we essentially followed Ernest Shackleton's route, and I can talk about Shackleton. He was an explorer, an amazing explorer and leader, whose ship was trapped in ice, and he was down there for 2.5 years. And so we went to South Georgia Island, which is where he eventually found his rescue. And on South Georgia Island, there's a colony of about 400,000 king penguins, which are the smaller cousin of the emperor penguin. And we went onto the shore at 4:30 in the morning. That we got into our Zodiacs before sunrise so that we could be on the beach surrounded by these king penguins as the sun came up. And it was just the most mind-blowing experience. And what I did not know about the king penguin, and what was a surprise, was how bold and curious they were about people. So when you go to Antarctica, you go to see penguins in the wild, and especially there are very strict rules. So you can only get within 20 feet or 15 feet of the penguins, and then, you can't approach them any closer. But if you stand or sit in one spot, if they want to approach you, they are free to do so. So I just sat down on the ground as soon as I got there. And the next thing I know, I have king penguins nibbling on my toes, on my fingers, on my camera. And I just was like, this is heaven. So they sort of, sorry, little blues, but the king penguin now is really the penguin that I'm sort of most fascinated by at this point in time.
All right. When you're doing research, when you're exploring a penguin, do you have any like Jane Goodall-esque type desire to like try and figure out everything about them, like write books about them, understand their social hierarchies? Like I'm really trying to understand, when you go to meet them, when you go to explore and understand them, what are you looking for? What is your ambition when they have your focus?
Well, I'm not a field researcher. I think, I went back to school in my 30s to do the work that I do now. And I think had I started younger, I would have become a field researcher. Because I'm so curious, and I want to know everything, and I want to, figure things out. But for me, what has always been the most interesting with any sort of animal is the behavior, why, and the communication too. So all, the nonverbal communication, the verbal communication, and And that's always been sort of the most interesting to me. So I'm always really observing the behavior and filming it and photographing it and bringing that back. So when I am teaching people about penguins, whether it's kids or adults, I'm able to really share a lot of these really interesting aspects of their lives that they might not know about or be aware of, because they certainly have emotional lives. They have their behaviors show us that it's not just all instinct that they're acting on. So yeah, I think that's what I find the most fascinating.
That makes sense. There's an authenticity when you can really understand them to the point where, if you were in front of people, you might be able to even like walk like them, like, hey, this is what it's like when you're in a group of them, which is reminding me of in Lord of the Rings, they had like orc training camp where everyone had to learn how to be like an orc. And it just adds an element when you're learning about something, when you're communicating something where you can actually, when someone knows what they're talking about, when you can replicate many different aspects. I'm not saying you go around and, walk like a penguin, but it all adds up cumulatively to allow you to speak on something very knowledgeably.
Well, it's funny you say that, Lowell, because one of my programs for really little kids is called Penguin for a Day. And that's exactly what we do. I kind of compare things that we do, how we do things with the way penguins do them. Like this is how we walk. This is how they walk and why. They waddle because they have knees, and this is how they cool off. And this is how and then we do a lot of the behaviors like the way the penguin would do it. So they could sort of make that comparison like, oh, okay. So we do things that are similar, but we have to do them a little differently. And so it helps them to sort of understand why penguins do what they do and how they do what they do.
It sounds like there'd be a really great business opportunity there to get the little blue penguin ones and then just expand it to the size of like a toddler and then say they could get it as a onesie and then, imagine like have the immersive exploration of it so you can go out there and then, donate the proceeds or whatever. But it sounds like a really great business opportunity to make like even adults, like the people my age. And I'm not going to name anyone, but I have friends who have giant like Stitch onesies, or My Neighbor Totoro, where one friend in particular will say, if I'm wearing this, that means like be nice to me. And it's like, whatever helps you communicate that you need extra love, I don't mind.
Aren't they called furries or something? I'm trying to think of the name.
Furries are an entirely different thing. So,
okay.
I think furries are like a social plus it could be like a sexual thing as well.
Yeah.
But I guess anything can
That's
be. The
what I'm
internet's a
thinking
terrible
of. Okay.
place. But the difference, the way I imagine it is like furries take more commitment. So I talked to a furry and I wanted to get them on the show, but unfortunately they were not willing to like come on. And I think YouTube and the internet might like destroy what I'm doing. But the difference in terms of commitment is that a furry's outfit is like 10 grand.
Oh my God.
It's really expensive. Yeah.
Holy moly. So that's a commitment.
But like the Totoro Stitch onesies are like $30 at Target. So I feel like there's like that. I feel like that probably is the difference. Like, it's like how much you're willing to commit to do that. I feel like there's something extra there if you're spending that amount of money. And typically the people, it's like they're building it themselves. Like there's something like they're building their own plumage. Like if they're penguins, like they're trying to like show something off. That's how I see the difference. Any furries out there, you're welcome to message me and tell me about it.
I will straight.
Listen. Yeah, set us straight. You can comment on it, but I don't know if I could, I would like to have it so I could just interview anyone. But I think that there was like recently, there was like some censoring going on from like I've been posting on YouTube new stuff, and there's been like censoring of some of my content. So I don't know.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's all good. I'll get it worked out maybe one day. They pick on the people growing, but yeah. I don't know where we started with this thing, but now I have first in my head. So I'll go to one of my prompts. So I wanted to, So illegal hunting is the headline. In December 2020, a man was arrested in Argentina, which is for people who are globally, dyslexic, is pretty close to Antarctica, for smuggling more than 200 penguin eggs, highlighting the ongoing problem of illegal hunting for penguins and other wildlife, especially if there are emperor penguins that are on the endangered species list. And the fact that you have so many protocols to stay away from penguins and not mess with them, but if they come, near you, that's fine. What do you think about illegal hunting? What could be done to improve upon it? Have you seen it? I don't like I guess they just take a boat over and grab them when no one's looking.
I'm actually shocked that I have not heard this story until this moment. You said this was December 2020?
Yes, it's from The Guardian, and 200 eggs
Wow.
Yeah, I'll send it to you after this. I
What did
fully
it
researched
say?
this.
Was he harvesting them for food or for selling them to, facilities, or did it say what he
I
was
can pull
doing
it
with
up.
them?
One second.
Wow, I'm really surprised. Well, you know what? That was the
You
month my
jerk.
book came out, so I was very, very focused on that. So that might be why I missed that story,
Mm,
because I was having to do all sorts of promotion for the house. Like I was
yeah,
required to post, I think, every day for a month or something.
well,
Um,
that's wild.
so that might be why I missed that story. But now I have to look that up.
Yeah, but in terms of illegal
So
hunting and harvesting eggs, I guess.
yeah, it's all illegal. I mean, they're all
Yeah,
protected. Every penguin species is protected, whether they are listed as endangered or not. They're all protected. So any sort of hunting or anything like that of their eggs, of the chicks, of the adults, is all very, very illegal. But I know in South America and more in Paraguay, I've heard more of an issue with that. Than I haven't really heard of that in Argentina, but I'm sure it happens.
yeah.
So it probably would be Magellanic penguins, and there are large colonies of them, very large colonies of them, um, down sort of along the southern coast. So I'm very curious, like, was he harvesting those eggs for food? Because they used to do that. That was way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with some species, especially rockhopper penguins and African penguins, before anybody was really concerned about conservation, or really sort of understood the impact that humans could have on species. There was a lot of egg harvesting going on, and there were total breeding failures for years and years at some of these colonies. And that's why some of these species are still, to this day, they never recovered from that. And so in South Africa, for example, it was only, I think, 1967 that the egg harvest was made illegal. So it went on for decades. So well, when we are done, I'm going to go look that up because I want to know more about this story
Hmm.
now. Now I'm very curious. So yeah, I mean, anything we do, so many of the things that are happening, that sounds like it might have been a small scale operation and it might not have had a huge impact. But I mean, 200 eggs is, when you extrapolate down the generations, that's going to add up, onto how many birds we might have lost from that one collection. And who knows how many times who's out there collecting and didn't get caught.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of impacts that humans are having on penguins historically and to this day. So, things that we are doing, we may not even think about are impacting them because there's this ripple effect, and Jane Goodall says it a lot, every action, everything we do every day makes a difference. And what sort of difference do you want to make? So the biggest issue for penguins and so many other animals is climate change.
Hmm.
So, the thing we can each do in our own daily life is to reduce our carbon footprint, do what we can to reduce our impact on the planet. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say about all that. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder. I'm familiar with exotic pets as something, but I think in this case, if I remember correctly, it was just he was eating them, which is why not just eat like a chicken egg or something? It's like you don't get arrested for it, and a chicken will just live wherever you want a chicken to live, or like a penguin has only like a certain spots on the planet.
Right.
But I wonder to what extent there are exotic egg hunters that specifically are tailored to like the people who really like penguins in terms of getting eggs, hatching them, and sending them off. But it sounds like breeding and rearing the eggs, that might be really technically difficult. So that might not be something that the average Joe could do.
I mean, the reason I said that is because, historically, most zoos and aquariums, their colonies were started with a combination of eggs that were brought back and adults, or juveniles. So historically, and even probably until recently, some of this egg collection was going to start zoos and aquarium colonies. So, that it's possible that might have been what he was up to, but and their eggs were considered a delicacy in some parts of the world. So, and it, who knows, maybe the guy was starving and that's the only way he could feed his family. I don't know, but
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's a big thing with conservation too. That's such a challenge, is that oftentimes, I mean, when we're looking at, the rhinos and the elephants and animals like that, with all the poaching that's going on, it's out of desperation. The people they don't have, financial means. And a lot of the hunting that goes on like that is really because they don't have other good options, so I'm not excusing it or pardoning it in any way, shape, or form. But, a lot of the stuff boils down to economics. And if we can provide alternatives, in a lot of cases, instead of, poaching an animal, if we could provide some sort of services and alternatives and other job options, where people can make a living. But, they get so much money from an elephant tusk. There's nothing you could give them that's going to equal that. So it's such a complex, complicated issue when you're getting into wildlife conservation and sort of what drives it and how to fix it, how to solve it. It's above my pay grade. It's a really complicated issue.
Yeah, we recently had Drea Burbank, who's down in the Amazon, I think still, even from the time that I interviewed her. And what she does is she works with local groups to find other opportunities with carbon credits and other means, so that instead of, chopping down the forest, they can preserve them and have like ecotourism and all these other things go on to preserve the rainforest. There's a lot of stuff like that. I think a lot of times when people read these things, they think, oh, this person's, doing this not great thing. They think, I would never do that. There's like, oh, I'm like this morally superior person. So I guarantee if you're starving and you're in that position and you have someone you love that you want to take care of, you're going to do worse things than that to get yourself taken care of. But in a lot of these situations, if you give them a different path, even if it's not making as much, a lot of them do take it because like they don't want to be doing it. They just want to provide for their family, have a good life. It's the same as everyone else. I think sometimes people, I think it's called Sonder, Sonder, where you stop and realize that other people have exactly a vibrant of a life as you, like they're sentient creatures. I think it seems that sometimes people just walk through the world and like everyone else is like non-player characters and you're the only PC. And that's a game way of thinking of things. But I think for people listening in who think, if you are thinking, oh, I would never do that, if you were in those situations, and so creating economic opportunities, maybe, if there's like a super penguin rearer for the eggs, that maybe there's like an avenue where that person like helps, start breeding programs to bring back the emperor penguins or something. Like the skills are there. They just need to be utilized in the right ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what Sandcob in South Africa, they have been hand raising penguin chicks now for, oh gosh, I think it's 16 years now, their program, their chick bolstering project, because the species is highly endangered. Their numbers are crashing, and they have, learned how to very successfully hand raise penguin chicks. And so, they have actually raised in the last 16 years, they have hand raised 10,000 African penguins and successfully released them into the wild. And that is actually about 1/3 of the total population of the species now. So thanks to that one breeding program, they've
huge.
Yeah, it's huge. 30% of the whole population is chicks that they have hand raised. And without that program, the species would be crashing very soon. We'd be looking at the extinction. So it works, right? Hand raising, breeding them works. So yeah, we could use some more programs like that.
I wonder how many chicks the average mating pair of those penguins produces, and then you can calculate out that 10,000, maybe it actually is going to be responsible for like 50 to 60,000 just on the first generation or something. I think often when I read things, they just say, 10,000, but it's not just 10,000. It's like 10,000 plus the first generation of the multiplier, which is equally as exciting. It's like when people release turtles and like, there's like these beaches full of turtles, and then they come back and then they have the next generation, which is getting even bigger. It's like the multiplying effect, which is like one of those things that I think is really fascinating when I hear about it.
Well, and the interesting thing too, at least with the African penguin, because it has been really studied so well, this program, is that the human raised chicks have a much higher survival rate than parent raised chicks. And they have, more, a greater survival to breeding age than parent raised. And that's probably due to the fact that when they're under human care, they're not going to release them into the wild until they're nice and fat and, all their feathers are in and all the conditions are right. Whereas in the wild, there might not be, where they live, there's a lack of enough fish. So and the reason these chicks are being hand raised is because the parents abandon them because the fish that they normally feed on is endangered and their populations are crashing. So a lot of these chicks get abandoned. So the people can do better at raising the chicks than the actual penguins can. So it's really actually kind of important that we do step in and help them out if we can.
Are there programs that aren't getting the credit, in your opinion, that they deserve in terms of they're doing great work like this, but maybe it's being unrecognized?
In general, I don't know that many people know anything about any of these programs that are, any of these places that are raising penguins. Really, I know about them because I'm in that world. And, Sand Cob is probably the best known of all of them. There's the Yellow-eyed Penguin Trust in New Zealand. There's Phillip Island in Australia with Little Blues. Some of these names, maybe some people have heard of. But honestly, I doubt many people have heard of any of these places. So I think they could all use a little more, boosting their visibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they sound fascinating. I didn't really know about them until you started telling me about them 5 years ago. And now I'm like, I try to make newsletters and stuff so I can kind of keep abreast of everything because it's hard. I recently interviewed someone who said, if you're reading about it, you're not on the cutting edge of what's happening. It's like you have to really be seeing what the people are doing. And then you get what's actually you're kind of ahead of the curve. And so as much as I can, I like to find out where the action is and then learn more. But we mentioned overfishing, and I found another article from The Guardian, and it's in August 2021. This is more recent, so maybe we'll get this one. But
okay.
In August 2021, the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, CCAMLR.
CAMLR.
Why does everyone have to have CAMLR?
CAMLR.
They need to add an AT at the end, so they need CAMLR or something. But
all these are bad acronyms. SANCOB's a bad acronym. CAMLR's a bad acronym. Yeah, sorry.
They failed again to establish marine protection areas in the South Ocean, despite calls for conservation groups and scientific evidence of overfishing and habitat destruction. Can you speak about we all know it's going down, and I think I recently read a report in conjunction with this one that if people stopped fishing, and this is a huge ask, we could not do this, but if we stopped fishing for 6 years, the whole world's oceans would rebound in 2.
Wow.
Just they're but you can't get people to do that because I think fish is half of how everyone eats. But when you're traveling, how is overfishing? How are you seeing it when you're in your travels personally, or what are your thoughts on this?
It's not something that you can't kind of see it from above the surface, right? I know it's going on. I know that it's the number 2 problem for penguins is starvation due to, they believe starvation due to overfishing. Number 1 is starvation and other problems due to global warming. So it's clearly impacting penguins and many other species. I just kind of lost the question.
No,
tell me again.
Do you think setting aside if CAMLR,
sorry,
if they could set aside protected areas, have we seen that to be an effective way to rebound species?
Yes.
Okay.
So I remember now CAMLR was the first thing. And yes. So for example, again, I'm going to go to South Africa, because that's where I kind of follow them most. I know this is happening in other places, but they did close off. They did some experimental closures of the foraging grounds of penguins around some of their certain areas where they normally would be hunting near their breeding islands. And they wanted to see, they had a study because of course this is very controversial because the fishermen, that's their livelihood, right? And what do you mean you're going to not let me fish in this area that's abundant with fish? But they're but the penguins are dying. So they did this temporary closure to study the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute. And what they found was by closing off this area, I think it was a 15-kilometer radius around one of the breeding islands,
That's
and
pretty
they
small.
found that the penguins were expending 40% less energy on each of their hunting, foraging trips, and 40% less time as well. And so they were able to get back to their chicks with more food, and expending less energy and calories themselves. And so their survival rate and the chick survival rate was boosted. So they now do have some areas, marine protected areas, that are no fishing zones, but we need a lot more of them. And CAMLR, they have been trying. I mean, they did manage to protect a large portion of the Ross Sea finally. But there's a few countries that just, put on the brakes every single time. Like they think, oh, finally this year, we're going to get everybody to just sign on and agree.
Mm.
And then you've got a few countries that, are big whaling countries, and they're like, nope, they won't sign. So I know some people that are, at those CAMLR meetings every year, and I know it's a source of great frustration. But they can only do what they can do.
Yeah. Well, maybe we need to hire some privateers or something and take down the whaling ships, or get them to stay out.
Right. Who's in Greenpeace doing that, and Sea Shepherd, they're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that they kept getting arrested. But I guess if you're in international waters, I don't know the rules of international waters and what people do to pirates, but I wanted to ask you about habitat loss, which I think is related to what we're talking about. So this is a study as well. In 2022, we talked about these penguins, king penguins. In January 2022, a study found that king penguins on the Crozet Islands in the South Indian Ocean are at risk of losing their breeding grounds due to rising sea levels caused by climate change, with up to 70% of the island's suitable habitat projected to be lost by the end of the century. For these animals that have found their breeding sites, as the levels have increased, have we not really seen them adapt to a higher level, or how do we see the animals adapting to these rising sea levels? Because this one suggests that it's going to be pretty bad for at least the king penguins. This is the BBC.
It's interesting that I know at least in Antarctica, on the Antarctic Peninsula, and it's not because of sea level change yet. It's more because of precipitation change. So something that most people don't realize about Antarctica is it's technically classified as a desert because it's actually extremely dry. There's very little precipitation there. So most of this, snow and ice, it's been there for thousands of years and just getting blown around in the wind. But there's actually not a lot of snow or rain falling. However, over the last 50 years, temperatures have risen dramatically. And this has caused an increase in precipitation in both the form of rain and snow. And so, when you have these warmer temperatures, there's more moisture held in the air. So a lot of people say, well, it's snowing, so how could it be global warming? But that's happening because it's warming. So it's a little counterintuitive. But because of this, what we have seen on the Antarctic Peninsula is where some penguin colonies are dispersing, they're moving. So they are sort of adapting in real time because they're leaving a colony because normally they might, want a snow-free place to lay their eggs and raise their chicks. And now all of a sudden there's snow there, or there's so much rain that the nests are flooding. So we have seen some movement. For example, some of the Gentoo penguin colonies are moving further north on the peninsula. Some Adelie colonies sort of disappeared and nobody knew where they went, but then they discovered some other, north of the peninsula, some large Adelie colonies. And they're like, well, maybe they went there because those seem to be increasing. We don't know if it's those same penguins, but theoretically it could be. So they are seeing, I think it seems to be in real time that some of these penguins are adapting. So I would assume in Crozet that if the sea level rose, that the penguins would, just go to higher ground as long as they could, as long as there's higher ground to go to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think probably the issue is that maybe they start running into each other's elbow room. Like right now, Antarctica is quite expansive, they
Right.
have some separation. But I think there's some penguins that don't mind having them as neighbors, but eventually it might be a competition issue. There's not enough land to go around.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You could run out of land space, of breeding space. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do penguins represent anything either as a food web or as a potential to learn from in terms of, so like I'm thinking of frogs.
I missed your first part of your sentence. What did you say?
Yeah, I was just setting up the question, which is, what do penguins have? I'll go with what I was thinking. I think that'll
Okay.
now I forgot where I started.
Sorry.
But
I
no,
missed
it's all
the
good.
word that you said, and so I was like, I can't follow what comes after it, but I don't know what that word was. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm picturing and imagining frogs. So when something happens to frog species, it's like a keystone species that shows you some other stuff that's going on, and they have other value as well. What are penguins' value in terms of like the food web or how we look at them? Do they have anything like that where penguins have, like, if you're like an evil utilitarian person looking at penguins and thinking like, oh, should I care about them going away or not? Do they have like frog value, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. They are also a keystone species. They're an indicator species. So penguins are considered an indicator species. So, they're near the top of the food chain. There's not a lot of things that prey on them. So, and they are considered, if we see that their populations are crashing, that is an indication to us that there is something going on in their ecosystem, right? So they're sort of raising, waving this flag like, hey, check out the problem here. You got to fix this because our populations are getting smaller and smaller very, very rapidly. So what I will say, and I haven't said this yet, just to sort of give an example of sort of how alarming it really is that 13 of the 18 penguin species are listed as threatened, near threatened, or endangered. And any one of those levels means they are eventually at risk of extinction. So it doesn't have to just be endangered to mean they're at risk of going extinct. Any one of those means eventually that's the path they're on. And most of them, their species, their populations have crashed 50 to 90% over the last 50 to 100 years. So, for example, the African penguin their population has crashed 98% in the last century. So we have 2% the population today of what it was 100 years ago. That's dramatic. That's very dramatic. And they're not the only species that is seeing a crash like that. The Galapagos penguin right now, there's about 1,200 left. The yellow-eyed penguin, about 1,500 left. And, a lot of these birds, we're looking at, numbers that won't be sustainable much longer. So they're in trouble. And that's what they're sort of alerting us, like, there's a problem that we need to take care of it in our environment,
It sounds like they let you know how much like fish, krill stuff is in the water. Like you can watch them and see that as well. Is there anything that we can learn from the 5 species that aren't endangered to apply to the ones that are endangered to save them?
Good question. Well, 3 of them are in Antarctica. So they're as far away from man as they can be.
It probably helps.
Yeah, helps a lot. So, and actually, and the others too are for the most part, in very remote locations. Not all of them, but most of them are in very remote locations. So, I think that's probably the lesson is, the further away they are from man, from where we live, the better off they are. The less interference they have, the less direct impact. We still have, for the emperor penguin to be listed as endangered, well, they're in Antarctica and they're in the most remote interior part of Antarctica, the furthest away from human interference. Yet what we are doing is still impacting them. So I think the biggest lesson really is that everything that we do has this ripple effect, has an impact on an animal we would never even see in our lifetime that lives as far away from us as it possibly could, yet it is still being harmed by us. So I think there's a big lesson there.
Yeah. If we made you czar, a penguin, not just penguin czar, but like czar of czar of any land or anything touching the penguins, which seems like you'd have global reach. But what would be some of the practices you want to see us adopt? What would you want to see the world do to help the penguins, or in general, anything 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon from penguins? What would you want to work on? Like, what do you see? What would be like your vision for things?
Yeah. I mean, so when people say, what could I do to help penguins?
Hmm.
There's everything from what I started off saying earlier, in sort of a very broad way, is to reduce our own impact on the planet, especially when it comes to global warming. So, there's all these footprint calculators online that you can go to and find out how much carbon am I putting into the atmosphere every year. And most of these footprint calculators will also give you a lot of tips and advice for things you can do to reduce your impact. I mean, just like simple things. If you're shopping online, if there's something that's in California and I can get the same item in Boston near where I live, but I have to pay more to buy it in Boston, I'll buy it in Boston because there's less of a footprint, right? So just little things. And I know, it's a big, big, big issue, and it's the corporations that are really doing the most polluting. But if every person does what they can together, we can make a difference. So in a broad sense, that's one of the first things I always say, because global warming is the number one threat to all penguins today. If people want to do something very direct, I always recommend to donate to one of these many places throughout the Southern Hemisphere, one of these rescue centers or conservation groups. And on my website, thepenguinlady.com, there is on the navigation bar in the top right, there's a button that says help penguins, and the drop down, I think it's the second drop down, is donate. And if you click on that, there is a very extensive, personally vetted list of all of these places. Like, I know these people, I can vouch for them. These are all legitimate. The money is going towards, the penguins and the work. They're all very dedicated people. And in fact, I've got to add a few places to that. I need to update my site because there are a few new places within the last few years. So you can support them and the great work that they are doing, because they all really are doing vitally, vitally important work to protect the species that, are in their region, and to help them survive and thrive moving forward.
Mm-hmm. There's an organization, I think it's called Hereford International or something like this, where they do a fundraiser every year, and I think it's like $1 million that they try to do. But they have these like Kickstarter-esque tiers where they say, hey, if you donate $10, we're going to give like 3 chickens to this underprivileged family, and this is the effect it has. And so I was wondering I could see you leading this, because I think you're always out when I'm thinking of penguins and doing great work. If there's a potential for all these organizations to tie together and have an umbrella campaign to raise, $1 million or whatever, and then break it down increment to like the different conservation projects that could be achieved through that, I think that'd be pretty powerful. Because one, like, people usually pretty fury with like $20 if they see like such a big impact. And when people donate, they like to see where it goes. A lot of nonprofits, I've been recently pulling tax returns from nonprofits and stuff, and it's really disturbing to see when people want to do well, how it gets way late. So I really love that you have a curated list where things can be great. But I also imagine like maybe there's a potential there for that list to come together and do like a Hereford International type campaign, make like an ultimate list, like, hey, with like this amount of money, we can do all these types of things. But this year we're going to look for this amount. I don't know. What do you think about this idea? Maybe this is something that people listening, we could all like, clamor together to do it.
I like it. I'd like to explore that idea more. I mean, I know that, every 3 years, all of the penguin researchers around the world, and all of these people that are, the places like Sand Cub and Yellow-Eyed Penguin Trust, and people in zoos and aquariums. And that's how I got into doing this. Well, every 3 years is the International Penguin Conference, or the IPC. And it's held in a different country every 3 years. And that's when all of these people come together. The researchers share their research findings, and, a lot of collaborative things start at these IPCs. So, and there is an IPC coming up, and I won't be going, but I still am in touch with a lot of those people. So, maybe I can put a bug in some people's ears, and because I'm sure, I mean, we've all been working together collaboratively for decades. But I don't know if anyone has done something like that. Not that I've heard of,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting concept. So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a group called New Harvest, and I've been like saying this to them for years, and they accidentally did it where this past year, they're not doing the conference this year. Makes me deeply sad. Isha and Co. I hope you do it next year. But the last year they said, hey, we're running out of money, and if we don't get some money, we might have to like close down and like all these things. So they were like, hey, can we raise money right now? And they raised $1 million in 15 minutes with the people there and the people like listening in. And so that's what I'm always telling people. Like everyone is already like bought in and cares. And so if you just like put like one of those like blood donations where it's like a little thermostat and then you have the little increments and stuff, like it doesn't have to be complicated. But if you just say, hey, we're starting the day, this is our goal. Here are organizations. They're going to talk about the different conservation that we're going to do as we meet these mile markers, and there's like philanthropic that can like do matching donations. So they could do like, I'm a pseudo wealthy person. I'm going to put 50,000 in matching donation. So every person who donates $20 is actually donating 40 and stuff like that. So I always feel like stuff like that, where everyone comes together, there's a unique opportunity to just galvanize it and do something with it.
So what platform did they do this on? Do you know?
They just did it. They just did it off the cuff. But like you can.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you could do like I'm sure there's a way that either already exists or that it could be wired up to have that type of like funding thing where people could donate from wherever they are, especially with like Bitcoin and stuff that exists nowadays. Like I'm sure there's like some type of like decentralized way of managing it. But it's just one of those things I think about quite often, and the different areas that I'm aware of. The biggest thing that people talk about is like funding, and then what result comes from the funding. Usually people are using lasers to do work, and they're getting such outsized results from it. And so I feel like there was just a structure, a format where people knew, hey, there's gonna be a surprise this 3-year conference, and then day one, hey, here's our objective, and then like every couple of hours or whatever, you just update it. I mean, they did it like in like 20 minutes, and they raised $1 million from a group of people that, I mean, like some of them are affluent, but not a lot of them. So that's pretty cool.
Wild. Yeah. Okay, well, you've really put this could be a really cool thing if they potentially did it during the IPC, like when they're actually all there together. That would be very cool.
It's really easy to add an online component to conferences. I'm always surprised when someone has a in-person conference if they don't just buy like $500 worth of camera equipment and then get like one of these online conferencing tools like Hopper or whatever it's called, and then you can just wire it all together, and then people can like vote on the questions for people to ask, and even people there can ask questions, which also benefits to introverts who don't want to speak up in conferences, but they could still have their question read. So you can have the people there, you can have people like virtually there, and regardless, they just built a larger community. But yeah, it's something I think about a lot, but I want to like spend our time. But I just if you like it,
I do like
about this
it
all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. My problem is usually I don't have enough time to go and like do it for people. So I try to like, hey, here's an idea, and we can talk about it if you want. But so some of this is the power of people working together, by the way. But so human disturbance on negative side, and I imagine if you saw this, you would just like swat people. But in November 2020, and this is from The Guardian as well, there was a video of tourists chasing and harassing a group of king penguins in the Falkland Islands, which went viral. I don't know what viral means in this context, but sparking outrage and causing for stricter regulations on tourist activities, which is probably why you have to be 15 feet away, all these different things. I really find it hard to believe that people who are there, they probably aren't going alone. So how are they, I mean, have you ever seen anyone act this way? I just feel like it's a no, because you would swat them. You'd be like, oh, I see what you're doing.
I'd be all over them. I would be all over them.
Do you see that cliff over there? And you're just like, yeah, dude, there's something really cool on the edge of it. It's like, oh no, they slipped. Never to be seen again.
Oopsie.
Yeah. I imagine you're just like supportive of not this type of thing. Yeah.
No, I mean, I am not shy about speaking up when I see any sort of, people harassing any sort of animal. I mean, literally, I live on a pond, and about 10 years ago, I went out and chased some people because they were in their motorboat. They were chasing a great blue heron, and like literally like right on its tail, and it's like squawking and flying and trying to get away from them. And I like went out on my kayak, and I just like, I've never paddled so fast in my life, and lit into them. Like they never came back. But No, I
Yeah.
would definitely be the first one there telling them to, back off.
Yeah, in the United States, the FBI, if someone's doing any animal cruelty, you can actually report it to them. It's one of those, it's a factor they look for
To the
negative
FBI.
things.
Wow.
Yeah, the FBI, I'm pretty sure you can report animal cruelty to the FBI. It's one of
Wow.
the key indicators for like sociopathic and
Mm-hmm.
serial killerish behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, those people are probably doing other negative things.
I mean, this was just really what it was like a
Mhm.
drunk dad and son, like an adult son, like, 40. And
Yeah.
the dad was maybe 60, but they were just drunk and stupid. Yeah. And they
No,
didn't live on the pond, they weren't local.
I mean, there's just so many things about that reveal aspects of their character.
Yes.
It's I finally believe like alcohol just it reduces your thinking, but it's still like fundamentally yourself. I don't know, when people get drunk, they're about the same. I don't know, they're probably a little more loquacious. I don't drink, so it's been a while, but I feel like when I was drunk it was about the same. But if I probably just wanted more hugs, that's about it. But but is there for tourists, is there anything when you visit yourself, is there anything that you wish that they had in place to either make it either a better experience or to protect the animals that you see that they're not doing? Is there opportunity here for tourists to do a better job?
Well, I think there's always an opportunity because there's always some stupid tourists that are doing stupid things. I'm sorry, I hate to say it, but it's true. There are people that get too close. People want to get close, and they want to get the selfie with the animal now. Now that, social media, they're all like, I want the selfie with the seal on the beach. And so people, I think social media has actually exacerbated that issue of people getting too close and harassing wildlife. It really, I think, is a big piece of that. So yeah, it would be like, I think the issue would be just keeping people far enough away and like no selfie with the animal, like, unless, the sort of this type of situation that say I was describing in South Georgia, where it's a very controlled situation. You've got, you've got your naturalist guides there, and they're telling you explicitly what you can and cannot do. And, people follow the rules because the people generally that are going on a trip like that, they're mature, they love nature, they respect the wildlife, they're in awe, and they're just, they're not the type of people that are going to go harass the animal, and they're not drunk on shore. I think, alcohol can certainly exacerbate, or other, things can exacerbate people's behavior. So yeah, I think it would be primarily just, if they could fence off areas that so that there wasn't access to some of these areas where the penguins are trying to nest. And, some places have done that, but not a lot. Yeah, it would just be sort of controlling the behavior.
It sounds like if you maybe a little breathalyzer before you step on the ice and say it's for your own safety because you drown faster with this. I don't know, make an excuse. And then the other one I'm hearing is maybe they have professional photographers that will just go around and take like imagine wedding photographers, but for these excursions. And there's like 2 or 3, and they just take it for everybody. And then you can be like, hey, I was there with Diane. I didn't even know she was there because I was like over here doing something else. And then it's like a little social thing there. Maybe those two things. There's a movie called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and there's I love this movie. There was a photographer who was there taking pictures, and I don't know if photographers do this, but I just like this concept where sometimes he wouldn't take the picture and he would just enjoy the moment.
Yes.
And there's an element of like when you're trying to capture the moment, you're not getting the moment.
Yes.
And so maybe those two things, they would be able to remember the moment and they'd be able to appreciate the moment because professional photographers are taking care of things.
It's funny you say that movie because I actually saw that movie on my way back from Antarctica on the plane, and I loved it. And I actually, the first time I went to Antarctica was in 2009. And I had started my company a few years earlier. And so I was so focused on, and I was there as a guest lecturer on the ship. But I was so focused when we were on land, when I wasn't interpreting for people, because that was part of my role, was just taking as many photos that I could so that I could use them in my educational programs when I got back home. So, and we were only there for a short time. I think it was maybe 5 days. And so I was just, camera in front of my face the entire time. And I realized after I got home, I'm like, I was so wrapped up in working and getting so many photos that I never just sat back. Excuse me. I never just sat back and just took it in. And I remember saying, if I ever get back there again, I'm going to make sure, like, I know I'm still going to take photos because I'm a photographer. I love, I still want to capture as many photos as I can. And I always take like 20,000 photos when I'm there. But I'm going to make a point to put down my camera from time to time and just be in the moment. And so on each of, my next 3 trips, I did make sure to just be and to just take it in. I mean, I certainly took a million photos still, but I think it is, we miss so much sometimes when we're just constantly trying to capture it, and again, this whole sort of selfie culture, social media culture that we live in where, oh, I got to get a picture for, and I never think to take a selfie. Like I have missed so many opportunities, like with, people that, why did you take a picture when you were with, Sylvia Earle or whoever? I'm like, I just didn't think of it. I'm of a generation that's just not it's not top of mind. But I think you miss a lot when you miss being in the moment, you miss being with the people you're with, you miss being in nature when all you're focused on is getting the picture or putting this on Instagram, like just be, experience, feel it, yeah. Be present.
I think you also remember it better. I think the times where you're just living in the moment, it sinks in a little bit better. You have a little bit more details that you can pull back on.
I would agree.
There's like it's like a compounding effect of everything. You have to put the camera down, but you don't. I think maybe the fear might be you put the camera down, you miss the moment, but you're not going to miss the moment because you remember it. You remember
Hopefully.
it a little bit
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. There's like a couple more topics. I just want to be respectful of your time as well. So invasive species in August 2020, a colony of rats. Oh man, I wrote this yesterday, and I write things and then I forget that I write them. But anyway, so a colony of rats. It's like I didn't think this was that. I thought I put it earlier. But in 2020, a colony of rats introduced. My apologies. In 2020, a colony of rats were introduced to a remote island of Gao in South Atlantic, threatening the survival of millions of
Gough Island. Gough.
Yeah.
Gough.
Really, it's Gough. Gough. With an F or a T?
With an F.
With a T.
Gough.
Okay, Gough.
Yeah.
Gough. All right, so
that's okay.
I'm like mildly dyslexic too, so it's always fun to hear myself read these on the back. But threatening survival of millions of seabirds, including endangered Tristan albatrosses, Atlantic yellow-nosed albatrosses, as well as northern rockhopper penguins. Well, first of all, have you heard of this? Like people I think they probably just swam there. No one did this on purpose. I want to believe this. But when it comes to the places that have penguins, I know that's one of the features that brought down the dodo bird. They weren't stupid. There were rats there that were eating their eggs. So to what extent are invasive species a part of bringing down penguins?
Big problem. So I had not heard about this. Again, you're like, I don't know why I'm not hearing these stories. Because I know they went through a huge rat eradication program on South Georgia Island, actually. Because the rats and this is very gruesome. They don't just eat the eggs. They actually eat the chicks and the adults that are sitting on the nest because the adults won't leave the nest. And so they start eating, biting them on the back of their necks and stuff. It's just gruesome. So yeah, it's a huge problem because they start overrunning the place, because the rat doesn't have any natural predators. And so they start overrunning. And so they have to come in and do these massive eradication programs. So yeah, it's a big problem in a lot of these islands. And like you said, it's probably, the rats probably swam off of a ship, because that's how it's the ships, the rats are on the ships. So it probably, if a ship sank or who knows how they wound up on shore, but then they just, the populations explode because they don't have any predators on these islands. Yeah.
There in one of the 007 movies, the guy has Bond tied up, which seems to be the case with any of the movies, but he talks about how to kill rats. Like you put a drum and then you have some type of thing that they want to get in the drum. And then all the rats get in there and then you leave them into there until they start eating each other. And there's 2 left. and then you release them into the wild because now they have a taste for rat and they'll only eat other rats. I don't know if that's a thing or not. Have you seen this? Is that true?
I have not heard that.
I don't know if it's true. It was from a fiction store.
Gruesome, but if it's true, hey, if it works, I mean, that's pretty gruesome. I haven't heard that. I don't know if it's true or not.
I know this. I do know. If anyone knows if that's true, please let me know. That's crazy, and I just thought of it. But I do know that if you pamper rats, they have a social hierarchy where some of them, even if you give them all the resources they want, they'll stratify their hierarchy. If they put them in like a box or whatever, and you have all the food coming in, there'll be some that get pampered, like the 1% with humans, where like they get all the stuff or whatever. And then if you take the food away, they don't know how to survive, and then they get eaten.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, rats are very intelligent.
They're like humans. People study rats to understand humans. Yeah. Yeah. If you have like a kid or a human, and you try and take their thing away, they'll exhibit behavior just like a rat. A rat, if they're trying to protect, like it's like kibble or whatever it's eating, will turn its back to you just like a human. Sometimes when I'll see people interacting, it's like, oh, I know what they're doing because a rat does that. So like we have so many common behaviors. Yeah. I don't know if you ever like someone tries taking something from you and you just like turn your back and like go into a corner, but that's like extreme rat behavior. Yeah. So rats are an endangered species that comes in. Are there other species that are affecting penguins?
Yeah.
In this way?
Yeah. Especially in New Zealand. That's a lot of different introduced predators there. Stoats, foxes, ferrets, types of snakes. There's more. There's even been some birds. I mean, there's a lot of introduced predators. And even just things like cats and dogs and sheep trampling the nests because like New Zealand is like 80,000 sheep to every one person, it's like so many sheep there. So they even, are so abundant that they end up trampling the nests. And then dogs and cats, off they go and kill just for sport, for them, it's just sport. And so I know in Australia, like with the little blue penguins, just recently, and this happens, from time to time, they have laws, your dog is going to be on a leash on the beach because of the penguins. But people, obviously not everybody pays attention to that. Yeah. And a dog, like just recently, a dog went from nest to nest and just killed like 60 penguins and they just kill them. They don't, they're not eating them. It's just sport. So, so introduced predators are definitely a big problem for some penguins more than others. But especially now in Gough Island, that sounds pretty bad. And in New Zealand, a lot of them have an issue with that because there's a lot of different penguins actually in New Zealand as well.
Are there any conservation works going on currently that you like to combat these things outside of the one you mentioned previously? But I don't know if you mentioned a name or is an acronym on it that I didn't catch. But yeah, so who's counteracting these things?
No, the one. So, I can't think of the name of the one. It might be the South Georgia Trust. I think might be the one that oversaw that operation. I can maybe, give you get back to you and maybe you can put some links in. With some of those places. I mean, that particular program on that island, they managed to eradicate them all. So as far as I know, unless, they've had a resurgence, that sort of they've done it. Excuse me, but they may be able to give me information about other programs that might be happening.
Great. Yeah. And then people look for those because maybe there's something in your backyard because there's people in the South Pacific. I don't know if Australia counts as that region, but there's people who listen in from that region. So maybe they can then help out. You'd be surprised how often there's something going on in your backyard and you just like, there's no alert for it or something. You just have to like go for a walk. I discover things all the time. I just go for a walk in a city. It's like, oh, wow, there's an arcade here. It's like, why don't you have a bigger sign? But one other element that I'm curious about in terms of affecting the population of penguins is disease. And I think it was early 20s. My notes on this were sparse. It's from National Geographic, so it better be right. But there was an outbreak of avian influenza, which killed thousands of penguins on the beaches of South Africa, raising, obviously concerns for the whole penguin population. How are viruses and diseases affecting penguins?
It's pretty bad, actually. there have been a lot of different viruses actually over the last almost decade now. Like in New Zealand with the yellow-eyed penguin, there were like some unidentified viruses and bacterias and things that were killing a lot of those penguins, things that they just couldn't figure out what is this and how do we control it. And in South Africa, so now there's an avian flu that's wreaking havoc now. So yeah, viruses and bacterias and weird illnesses. And they think a lot of this is exacerbated by global warming because you've got this mosquito population are increasing and, sort of the conditions are right because it's warmer, because of, the conditions caused by climate change. So it's all sort of wrapped up into this, it might seem like, well, how is that, related to climate change? But it is. So again, it sort of all boils down to, for the most part, like if we can combat climate change, if we can get things back where they should be in terms of our climate, we might be able to resolve a lot of these problems that we're seeing right now, from starvation to viral outbreaks to, breeding colony collapse because of too much rain. And so, yeah, that it sounds like it might all be very separate things, but they're actually, a lot of them are very related, and they're related to climate change.
Is there anything today that's work being done to affect avian or other diseases, or like are there groups that go out there and, like, I don't know, give them shots or something? Like, what do we do when it happens? We just let them die?
Well, I mean, there's, sort of supportive care for the most part. I don't know if they are working on maybe a vaccine for some of these avian flus. For the most part, it's supportive care, just trying to keep them alive and get them through the hurt, get them through the worst of it, and then get them, fattened up again and healthy and back out and breeding. But, a lot of wildlife medicine we're figuring it out as we go along, it's very different than, domestic veterinary care for domestic animals, where, we've been doing this for so long and we really know so much because we've been working every day with hundreds of animals, whereas, you're not working every day with hundreds of penguins, so it takes more time to develop the science and the medicine behind it.
Well, I think it's a beautiful image of a bunch of penguins going into like a little hospital room. They have little beds and people are taking care of them. I'm sure that's not what happens, but that's what I'm picturing, and I like the image, so I'm going to go with that. What books outside of your own, which is going to be in the show notes, would you recommend people check out?
Oh my God, there's so many. If I'd known ahead of time, I would have had a little library of books here to show you. I'll have to send you a list, but I think the first one that pops to mind, and this is really for the penguin geeks out there, is by D. Boersma and Pablo Borboroglu, and it's called Penguins. I'm trying to think of the subtitle. A Natural History. And it's the most recent compilation of it's a really deep dive into every single species. And each chapter is written by like the leading global expert in that species, the researcher that's been, studying it for decades. And so Poppy, Pablo's nickname is Poppy. Poppy and Dee edit it. They kind of put the book together, but each chapter is by a different researcher, including them. And so for the real penguin geeks who really want to like know everything about penguins and this particular species, that is sort of like the Penguin Bible that I would recommend. And actually, I just last year, I think it is, for Shepherd, there's a new book list thing that people can say, hey, if I'm interested in XYZ, and you can go to this website and what books are recommended by an expert. So they ask experts to recommend 5 books, what they recommend. And so I did a list of penguin books for adults and a list of penguin books for kids. So I can send you the links for those, because those would be definitely sort of my top favorite books for adults and my top favorite books for kids that are all nonfiction. No, they're all nonfiction. So I can send you a link for those.
Sweet. Are you working on the Great Penguin Escape Part 2? they've come home. I
The
don't
Great
know.
Penguin Rescue. So, I've always wanted to write a children's version of the book because this is written for adults. This book right here is the one, my first book for kids, all about penguins, discover life on land and in the sea. And this came out in December 2020. And this is more sort of like a basic biology and behavior of penguins for kids. But I love the illustrations. Like this guy, Ray
Oh yeah, they're
Shule.
beautiful.
They're gorgeous. They're
Kill a whale. Run from them. Killer whales freak me out, even though they don't attack humans.
No, his illustrations are gorgeous. He's in the UK, and here's my favorite one in the book. That just took my breath away when I saw it.
Wow.
I mean,
for people listening, it's like a horde of penguins with, I think, an albatross, and it's just like the whole vista looks beautiful.
Yeah, these are king penguins. So this is basically like when I was describing, sorry for the people that aren't watching this on video. When I was describing being on South Georgia amidst this colony of, hundreds of thousands of king penguins, that's essentially what this looks like. And these, I think, are shearwaters that are, yeah. So that's my first kids book. I do want to write a children's version of The Great Penguin Rescue. And I've got other book ideas for both adults and kids that I haven't started working on yet, but I've got ideas going. Yeah.
It'd be interesting if you could find one that's just coming from the egg and you put like a GPS tracker on its head and then you track it through its entire life. And then you make a trilogy of books of you imagining what it's like to be that bird from its point of view. Like this is what it's like to grow up. Like imagine like a hormonal teenager as it's like trying to like go around and find bird stuff, and then the last part of its life where it has like grandkids or something. I don't know. That's like anthropomorphized, and I don't know if they see grandkids or they just see their immediates together. That I'd read that would make you cry at the end. It's like one of those like dog stories where the dog gets lost, but about penguins. Then it comes home. I tear up for those things, and I don't care. For people 25 to 35 who want to get into conservation or do more work with penguins specifically, outside of what we talked about previously, is there anything that you recommend?
Oh, gosh. So if you wanted to work with penguins, if you wanted to work with them in the wild, then, it really helps you have to have an advanced degree. So, and basically a PhD, but you can certainly go as an assistant field researcher without an advanced degree. But it's definitely, if you're in high school or beyond and you're thinking about that as a career, you really have to be studying the sciences, and thinking about an advanced degree. If you wanted to do what I had done, which is I worked at the New England Aquarium for 9 years. So I was in the zoo and aquarium world. And so that a lot of that was, hands-on caretaking, raising chicks, educating the public, doing the conservation work. It was while I was at the aquarium that I had the experience that led to this book, The Great Penguin Rescue. I went over to South Africa and helped manage the rescue of 40,000 penguins from an oil spill. And that was because, they called on zoo and aquarium people from around the world to come help because we had the day-to-day experience working with the species, and we had the day-to-day experience managing and training and supervising volunteers. So there were about 110 of us that came in staggered shifts to help manage the 12,500 inexperienced volunteers who showed up to help. Who they are the heroes of this story, because without them, we could not have saved all those 40,000 penguins. But if you wanted to do that type of work, again, you don't have to have an advanced degree, but for the most part, you do have to have a bachelor degree in science, some sort of science. Mine was in animal science with a specialty in veterinary nursing. So that was my route to doing it. And, if you're younger and you're thinking, I want to do either one of those, what I would recommend is to start volunteering as soon as you can, as soon as you're old enough, at, animal shelters or vet hospitals or zoo and aquarium science centers, doing any sort of animal care, animal handling, animal education that you can, so that you're learning, you're getting some hands-on experience, because that's important. And you're figuring out, like, is this really the right path for me or not? Because it's a lot of hard work. It's not a lot of pay. So you really have to be very deeply passionate about what you're doing and your mission for, your reason for doing it. You're not going to get rich doing it, but you might have a really adventurous and exciting and fulfilling life doing it. So, but it's good to get clear on that early on, because it's a lot of dirty, not glamorous work. You're getting bitten by penguins and pooped on by penguins and spat on by, kids that are looking in the exhibit. And, so I always recommend to volunteer. And also that's important if you are interested in the zoo and aquarium world, because 95% of the people that are hired they come from that volunteer and intern pool. So it's very difficult to get hired if if you haven't been there at all and they don't know you at all. So that's a big part of that world, is volunteering and interning to get your foot in the door.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because it's like they get to know who you are versus just someone off the street. You're just setting yourself up for success. It reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you. I don't know how this reminded me of it, but if you're going and hanging out with the being a tourist and you can't go to them, but they can come to you, are there any rules about just like being covered in krill and like fish? Like you just like rolled around. It's like if I was visiting a cat and I wanted to play with it, I'd roll around like catnip. But like, do people do this? Is there a regulation to stop it? Because that's what I would do.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but you could be the first. You might be the first to do it.
I probably don't want to be the first. They'll be like, it's like when a sign exists and it's like, you cannot bobsled down the street, and there's like no reason why you do that. I don't want a sign named after me in that way. But the last question is, and I'm pretty sure you're going to say no on this, but I just have to ask. So, have you ever seen Avatar: Last Airbender?
No, I've seen the first Avatar, but I haven't seen any of the others. Is that the first one?
I think you're talking about James Cameron Avatar.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the cartoon show from Nickelodeon called Avatar: Last Airbender. I actually think you'd like it.
No,
it's really
good. Okay.
Okay, so I highly recommend it. I don't have time. I'm not good at explaining. There's a creature called Appa in it that I think you'd fall in love with. But anyway, so in the first episode, or one of the first several episodes, there were giant emperor type penguins, and the main protagonist Aang would get on them and ride them down hills. You can't do that, right? Like that's just like that's cartoons. Okay.
Yeah, you can't do that. Sorry.
You get close enough.
Hate to burst your bubble, Lowell, but
I didn't want to ride them. I just was like, I don't know. You don't know until you ask. I am that person that would be like, can I ride? I don't know. When I was on a farm, I used to ride sheep. They were cool at it though, because you'd feed them afterwards. And I would also weigh like 20 pounds. Like they didn't care.
Yeah. No riding the penguins.
So no riding. Do they? Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
No.
Bursting my childhood dream there.
Sorry.
But that's all good. I figured it was a no, but I had to ask. But
you have to ask.
Yeah. So anywho, I just want to thank everyone for listening in, for tuning in, for being with us so far, whether it's audio, visually, wherever you are in the world. I really appreciate it. And Diane, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, talking about penguins, making sure I don't ride any of them, and helping people get excited about what's going on in the world. I think sometimes you only see the negatives. And while we did talk about negatives, there's a whole lot of positive that are people doing at the same time. So I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Lowell. It's great to talk to you again.